now it comes time to make a book and a movie. Frank Cooper has worked out a deal with me to take and try and make a movie of this. But I insisted that if there was going to be a movie, there also had to be a book, because I knew that the book would be truer to the real story than the dramatization that would be required in a movie.
My name is Hackman, Thomas Hackman Jr. On a Saturday in June 1967, I went to my ex-wife's house to pick up the kids. When I got there, the kids were gone, taken by agents of the United States Justice Department. Why were they taken? Why are they watching me? Why won't anybody help? If it was your kids, how do you suppose you'd feel?
James Caan in Hide in Plain Sight, rated PG.
Later on, when we talk about the movie, even James Caan admitted he should have paid more attention to a couple of suggestions I made at the beginning that would have made the movie a better movie. It needed more energy. Calabrese seemed to like the portrayal by Bob Vajaro. I did not think much of it, nor did I think much of Dan Aiello's portrayal of me in that movie. I was told later that some of the best scenes involving my character were on the cutting room floor because Danny just overacted them, over-dramatized them. Now, eventually, Tom would be reunited with his children, and it was all a result of that phone call from Rochelle. She realized, as I said, that the book and a movie were going to be made. She didn't want to be portrayed as a witch with a capital B, and she knew that that's what was going to happen, because she and Calabrese had now split. She was now willing to let me talk to the children. Tom went out to see them, but the relationship was never the same. It was not a father and child relationship. They were 7 and 8, now they're 15 and 16.
Given the number of years that had gone by, and given the environment that his children were raised in, it was too late for him to be able to recreate, reestablish any sort of a powerful, positive connection with his children.
They didn't want to come east. He wanted to take them back home with him. But their lives were now centered in Nevada. When they were told what their real name is and who their real father was, they didn't believe it at first. They remembered Tom as some vague figure, a man who picked them up once in a while at their house. They were children. So, with all of our efforts, the media made this possible by making the public aware that their government could do something so grossly un-American. They made them aware of that. Secondly, we failed in the court system to give Tom proper redress. Irving Kaufman in the Second Circuit said, well, this case would take the wisdom of Solomon. No, Judge Kaufman, all it would have taken was for you to realize that you had to figure out a solution that was an American solution, a just solution. I'm not saying dismantle an important program that was out to get organized criminals. You know, I faced another problem. People thought I was hired by the mob to use Tom as a foil to get to Calabrese. Nonsense. When I was nominated to become the United States Attorney for the Western District of New York, it was a problem. It was a problem for some people. Look, I'm an average guy. I'm a lot like Tom Leonard, my client. I was nothing special, but I was chosen or gifted with this unique opportunity to do something important, and I was not going to fail. As the poem says, I was not going to go gently into the night. We're going to do this thing. We're going to see it through. And we changed the course of history. That program changed. Mr. Schur, the witness protection program, said to me, not only did he apologize, he said to me, this program is better because of you. This program has changed because of what you and Tom did to fight back, the courage that you showed. the government was capable of recognizing its mistake and doing some things to correct what would happen in the future. And I'll tell you, when I was the United States Attorney, the guys in the strike force had a tough time. If they wanted to put somebody in the witness protection program, they had to prove to me personally that they were not leaving collateral damage in the wake, that there were no other Tom Leonards out there who were going to be suffocated, whose relationship with their children. Those of you who have families who are watching this, imagine somebody plucking your children out of your life. And 8 years later, when you finally make contact, it's different. It's different. You weren't there to raise them the way you thought they should be raised. You weren't there to discipline them. You weren't there to give them values and ethics. You weren't a part of their lives. You didn't see them go to their first day of school. You didn't see them go to their prom or whatever, all the kinds of memories that families make. You missed out on all of that. There were dozens of people who got a hold of me in the wake of that case, some of whom I was able to help. And by this time, and before, of course, I became U.S. Attorney, I had some credibility now with the people in Washington. We changed this program. The focus became different than it had been before, and that they weren't going to be so cavalier about separating a parent and their children. It's about abuse of power, but it's also about the correction of power. But mostly, you know what this is? Hide in Plain Sight is a love story. It's about the love that would endure and fight back. It was about a father who just wouldn't say no. This meek, everyday kind of guy, this beer-drinking, blue-collar kind of guy who said, they're my children. And the biggest thing I can say about James Caan, the most successful thing, is at the end of the movie, when he doesn't hit anybody, but he raises his hand in a gesture that to me meant, I'm not done and you're not done with me. I'm going to find my children. That was the most significant, most dramatic moment of that movie for me, and there were a few others. Hide in Plain Sight was a movie, the first and only directorial undertaking by star James Caan. And James Caan became interested in this project. It was a book that had been written by Leslie Waller, who did a very, very good job. I had insisted that a book be done as part of the deal because I wanted the story to be told as accurately as possible. This is my favorite part. If the events of this story prove anything else, they illuminate Sal Martoche as one of nature's noblemen, unable to impute a harsh motive to the most evil human being, always ready to see the other fellow's side. So let me put it another way. The government hasn't given up. It's just started. James Caan hires some very good people to come in and do the scouting. They were just going to shoot initially a few scenes in Buffalo and really do the base of the shooting in Los Angeles. But they liked the feel of Buffalo. It's ironic because I think that was the first of the many movies now that have been made in Buffalo that have been taken by what they found here. But he had very definite ideas about how he wanted this movie made and what he was looking for. And he certainly didn't want some short, fat Italian lawyer from Buffalo telling him how to make his movie. But at the end, he expressed some regret about not paying more attention to the layering that I have suggested a couple of times. This movie, the opportunity when speaking both to Congressman Kemp and another Congressman Henry Smith, and then the conversations with Congressman LaFalce, all were opportunities, in my opinion, as well as some of my telephone conversations with Mr. Keneally and Mr. Schur from the Justice Department, that could have, I think, strengthened the message of this movie and where it was trying to go. Mr. Khan was, as I said, a person of very strong opinion and very definite ideas about what he wanted to do this. Most of the cast was made up of good actors, but who didn't have a great deal of notoriety or fame, if you want to call it that, in the industry. A gal named Barbara Ray plays Rochelle Leonard Calabrese in the movie. A wonderful portrayal of Joanne Leonard is played by Jill Eikenberry. Now, when they shot the movie, they made a lot of friends in Buffalo. Joe Jambra, who is a very important figure in local movies, became a confidant to many of them who appeared in the movie, particularly a guy named Robert Vajaro, who played Patty Calabrese. Joe was a facilitator with the Buffalo Police Department, with the movie-making people in Buffalo, and there was a guy named Joe Petronella, a deputy sheriff whose family owned the Armory Tavern on Connecticut Street, and that became the hangout for the movie-making people. They were in there for lunch. I think mostly lunches that they didn't pay for. They were in there regularly, and in fact, there are a couple of scenes. There's a scene that is supposed to be at a dance hall, a woman singing and people dancing. It's a party, and it is shot in the back of the Armory Tavern.
So Frank Cooper wanted to take all the cast and I guess some of the people who were working behind the cameras to lunch, and Sal arranged to take them to the Armory, which is this little tavern on Connecticut Street in Buffalo. And we were all sitting around this huge table, and there were probably 20 of us maybe sitting around the table.
Oh, there was more. There was 30 of us.
Maybe, okay. And people are ordering and they're drinking wine and everybody's having a great time. And you can see Frank Cooper, because he was hosting this lunch, gritting his teeth as another bottle of wine was poured and wondering what the tab was going to be. And finally, at the end of the lunch, he asked for the tab, and this teeny tiny little waitress named Annie, who was she was an institution there. He asked Annie for the check, and she brought him the check, and he looked at it and he said, called her over, he said, "No, I mean for everybody."
That is for everybody.
It is for everybody. So, I mean, we had this 2-hour feast. You and I went to watch filming one day. In fact, we went to watch filming, and the scene that they were shooting called for this guy who was playing a police officer.
Kenny McMillan, who played the Sam Giambrone character.
He was supposed to drive a car. So everything's going along fine. It never occurred to anybody that he might not know how to drive a car. So we get up to the scene and we're watching all this, and he's supposed to get behind the wheel and drive the car, and he said, "Wait a minute, I've never driven a car in my life." He was from New York, he grew up in New York, he had never learned to drive a car. So they had to stop everything, shut everything down, and give him a lesson. He only had to drive like for half a block, but they had to give him a quick lesson in how to drive a car.
He had to figure out where the brake was, you know.
Yeah.
They gave him a push, but he had to stop it by himself. One thing that not many people realize is one of the greatest character actors in the movies today, a guy named Joe Grafassi, is originally from Buffalo, went to Bishop Fallon High School, Canisius College. He was in the movie. He played Matty, the close friend of Tom Leonard's. Dan Aiello, who was at the beginning of his career, he was the line coach at DeWitt Clinton High School prior to making this movie. And his son, this is one of the ironies of Buffalo, and his son went to school with a young man by the name of Michael Battle, who I hired both as a law student and later on as an assistant U.S. attorney, and he became ultimately the first African-American U.S. attorney in the Western District of New York. His line coach happened to be the guy who played me in the movie. And Gerald Shore, who is one of the writers of this Witsec book, also attended the same high school. A lot of people worked on this, as I've alluded to a couple of times. There were a couple of young lawyers, Paul Stavis and Bill McTiernan, and there was Alan Firestein, who I worked with for a long time on this movie. And they're only a handful of the people I mentioned. My old partner, Stan Colasano, and the book was more accurate. The movie could have benefited from more action, more vigor in the presentation. And I know they wanted to paint Tom as an everyman who was not prone to violence, which he wasn't. He was a very meek kind of a guy, but he was solid and he was not going to give up. And I think they could have done a better job with that portrayal. But all in all, it resulted in tremendous changes in the witness protection program. They were willing to adjust, to make some changes. And I think that's a good thing. As I review the movie, it compresses the time into a much shorter framework. You don't get the picture that it took 8 years to find these kids. You're thinking maybe it's 8 months. You don't see all the struggle and all the manipulating that was done. What are we going to do next? Do we go to court and make this motion? Do we ask the media to get involved? Do we ask for Lee's help or George Borelli's help? Do we hope that the national media will take up this cause? And we tried to be strategic in what we were doing. You don't get a taste for that at all in the movie. You get a little taste of that in the book. Tom was not weak, he was meek. Patty was not tough, he was opportunistic. You don't see that. You don't see how smart Rochelle is. The person who plays Rochelle does not play her to that effect. And I think because they didn't have a technical person on set, if they had only hired me, they would have had a significantly more successful venture, in my opinion. It was not a success at the box office. It did receive some accolades in the media, particularly for the cinematography that was used. They did a lot of long shots, a lot of different kinds of that weren't used at that time in the shooting. Even the hokey accent, or whatever it was supposed to be, that Khan adopted when he was, he just looked like he was nervous and jerky.
We had 12 or 14 of the cast members and their significant spouses for dinner a few times, and they were all very, very happy to be not sitting in a restaurant, to have home-cooked food, and I think my cooking at that time was a little more rudimentary than it is today, but they still really enjoyed it. One of the things that I remember about the whole experience with the Leonards and the Witness Protection Program, Les Waller, who's the author of the book, was in Buffalo doing some research. But while he was there, our son, who was a toddler at the time, I don't think he was 2, was wearing very expensive orthopedic shoes. And we had just bought them, and this was 1976 or 77, and we had spent, I think, $150 for these orthopedic shoes. We got home, and he promptly climbed in the toilet and stood in the toilet with these $150 orthopedic shoes, and somehow Les was on the scene, and I was so upset and so angry. And I think it made the book, but it did not make the movie. The orthopedic shoes in the toilet didn't make the movie.
One of the great things that happened was that this movie had its premiere at the Shays. They had an old screen that needed resilvering. I don't even know if they do those kinds of things to screens anymore, but it was a process that cost $10,000 or $15,000, and they didn't have the money. So after we agreed to do this, the guy who was then the executive director over there says, oh, and by the way, we're going to need a new screen. So now I have to go and put the arm on these Hollywood types who are already thinking, the budget is being exceeded here. And luckily, I got them to give the $10,000 or $15,000 needed to put the new screen in. It was a black tie event in Buffalo, the showing, the premiere, and it was co-sponsored with WKBW Radio and Television. And Irv Weinstein was the main anchor at the time and a real big deal here in Buffalo. And
it was a very exciting event at Shape.
And it was a sellout. And it was $25 a person, which again, in the 1970s was significant money. And the place was sold out.
People were dressed to the hilt. I'm sure a lot of women went out and bought new dresses and went to get their hair done.
Limos.
People arrived in limos. It was just a really exciting event in the city of Buffalo. And this was 1978 maybe. We'd been through the blizzard of 77, we'd been through the blizzard of 78. The city was in a pretty rough spot, and it was such a huge, exciting event that really lifted up the city, at least for a little while.
It was wonderful, and for Tom, it was, and for Joanne, it was really exciting, and they loved the idea of being in the company of movie stars, and Tom and I traveled around and we did a lot of television shows in those days. All of that would not have been possible without the media attention that drew people, made people gravitate to this story. And it turned out to be the catalyst that succeeded when the legal system was not succeeding. I am satisfied with what we did.